Hey y'all, it's Michelle. Thank you so much for stopping by for a spell to check out my Halloween Hocus Pocus DIY spellbook. As I was watching this movie recently, probably for the 15th time this year, I'm not kidding, I thought, oh my gosh, I want to make this. And so I did, and it was so fun. There is a list of all the supplies you'll need and the links and the prices in the description. This book cost me $16 to make, which is a steal in my book. But even if you needed to buy everything from scratch, it cost around $22 to $25 for all of it, and a lot of these tools are ones that every DIYer is already going to have in their tool set. I decided a good place to start would be to make our little metal plaques that we need. You're going to need 4 of the corner plaques and 2 of the long pieces that go along the spine. So our first step is going to be to just trace out, I just eyeballed this, and then we're going to make a stencil out of each of our first ones and just use those to make the rest of them. Next, we're going to be applying our first layer of tissue paper. There are 3 layers total, and I chose tissue paper because of the gorgeous texture and wrinkles that are absolutely unbeatable. I love the look of this. And when you're applying your Mod Podge, you want a nice medium coverage. You don't want it too thin or too heavy. Just middle of the road is going to get you exactly what you want. When applying your tissue paper, you really just want to do light, loving, gentle pats. You don't want to smooth it out like I almost just did. Just a few pats will be just right. In the crease of the spine of the book, we want to smooth out any air bubbles and really get it adhered in that groove so that it can open and close unhindered. Aren't these wrinkles and crinkles gorgeous? I just love the delicious texture of this, which is an odd choice of words because we're making a skin book and that's disgusting, but I love the way it looks. You do want to let it dry in that shape. I just propped it on a mason jar and that worked perfectly. While that dries, we're going to get started on painting our metal plaques. It dries crazy fast, which is the best and worst thing about acrylic paint. We're ready to move on to our clay work, and I was really excited about this part because I love clay. It's one of my favorite mediums, and it always has been, and it's been a really long time since I've sculpted anything. I decided the best place to start is going to be with the snakes. They seem pretty straightforward, but I make a huge mistake right here, and I pre-make the bodies. Please don't do that because it starts to dry out. These first 2 snakes are the easiest. You just lay them on the plaque and get their slithers in, and then you want to tidy them up and get the head on, which is just a triangular squared off shape. And then you can start texturizing. These do not need to be perfect. Do not stress over it. Just have fun and let it flow and enjoy the process. Time for our pretzel-y snakes. You're going to make a loop to the left with it behind so it looks like a lowercase d. You're going to make another loop on the right and then bring the tail up from underneath through the loop on the left. And you're going to loop the tail over the post piece in the middle and let it naturally curve around so it just meets the bottom of the left loop. Time to get our tissue paper edges tidied up. You could cut it, but I opted to just fold it over and use a quick wash of Mod Podge. It will stick to that next page. I really wanted to do like a pleather panel, but I just forgot. Also, you're going to do the edges. Be sure that you drop some glue in your clean water. That would be awesome. So with the edges of the spine, you can just tuck those in if you have an open spine like mine. If you don't, you can totally just cut this and smooth it out with the glue. Next up is our eyeball, and I was so excited about this part. It was so fun and I love it. So I start off by making these two little panels of clay, and it's thinner where the eyeball touches the clay, just so it would be easier to put around and it's not all goopy around the eyeball. And I just snuggle the eye in there, get it tucked in tight, and the second piece is a little thicker than the first piece just because that's going to be the top of the eyelid. And I just position it where I felt like it looked natural. And then I start to blend out the seam as best I can. I decided to do this now for timing reasons, and also I felt like I had more control, whereas if I had done it on the book, that probably would have worked really well too, but the timing of it, I would have had to wait until the book was almost done. And I felt like this worked out better. Now I'm going to be dropping in some lines and some wrinkles. I didn't look at any references when sculpting this. I really just wanted it to be free-flowing and what felt natural to me. Please do not stress about things being perfect. Just have fun with it. Just let it flow. Let the clay take shape naturally on its own and just enjoy it. It's so fun, and don't let stress get in the way of trying things. Next up on our itinerary is the lock. So we're just going to roll it out to a thickness that feels right, and then we're going to lay out all of our little accoutrement that goes with it just to make sure the proportions look good. Once you find what feels natural, we're going to get it cleaned up and get the detail work on it. Now that we've got our lock tidied up and squared off, we're just going to drop in our dots. I just did them in groups of 3 and then left a little space for the line. On the back of the book, there's a clawed foot that holds the other side of the lock strap, I guess. And I've never actually noticed it before. I can't believe I've just never noticed. And so I just start off by making the general shape and then just drawing on the lines where I want to make my cuts. Then I make my cuts and I get it cleaned up, and then I'm just going to put in just a little bit of minimal detail work that it has. And it was kind of fun to look at the book in a little bit closer detail and just see what things are there that you just never really picked up on. And this was one of those. If you'd like to make the lock, just roll out 3 equal pieces of clay and braid those. Then we're just going to flatten it and shape it so that it's a little bit thick. Here are all of our finished pieces just waiting to dry. About 2 minutes after I finished filming this, I realized the lock needs to be sculpted around the book before you dry it. So do not dry it in this shape. Luckily, I didn't. And here are our snakes almost all ready to go. Another really integral piece of the book are the seams and the stitches, and the way that we accomplish this is we roll out really long pieces of clay, and then you want to arrange them where you want your stitches to be, and then we're going to start feathering out those stitches with our fingers, and you want to pull the clay all the way to the end until there's no more clay. You really want it to adhere to the book, which means that the clay can't be too dry or too wet. It just needs to be like a really good hydrated clay, and you want to really fan it out and feather that edge really good. And the amazing thing is it sticks really, really well, and that is such a cool little trick that you can do with clay. When your clay is all feathered out, we want to go in and drop in our seams. And how I did this is I just used this little tool and I kind of did little dots and little cuts, because if you drag it, you're gonna pull the clay away from the book, and that's the opposite of what we want to happen. So you just do a little bit at a time, and then once you get a big long piece, you can then drag it through, but you really wanna get that little ditch in there and just tapping it in before you really start to pull and drag. And then once you get it smoothed out, then you can kind of go over it a few times and start really dragging that piece through. Okay, we're going to be dropping in some happy little stitch placeholders. I would space it out a little bit more than I did. I got a little bit tired doing them so close together, and the more of them you do, the more stitches you have to put in, so be aware of that. Next, we're going to be helping that edge of clay just disappear by putting on some more tissue paper just over the edge and then over all the places that are open. This is really going to help layer some of the wrinkles and then just help melt that edge into oblivion so it's all one cohesive piece at the end. We're just going to tear off this line of tissue paper and then blend it out with Mod Podge. Works great, it's seamless. Now we're ready to start painting. So any warm brown will work. And the thing about tissue paper is it's translucent. And so it'll take on the color of whatever is behind it, which is why currently it looks red because my book is red. So this paint is pretty thick. I did water it down just a little, and I am focusing that paint on the seams. I promised you 2 methods, and here it is. Hot glue is a staple for any DIYer, and turns out it works pretty great for the stitches and the seams if you don't want to do the more complex version with the clay. Our clay pieces are all dry and are ready for paint. So we lay down this first base coat and just try to get in all the creases and the crevices just as much as we can without painting the eyeball. Let's finish up all of our silver pieces and get those drying. Our next step is to cut out circles of paper towel that are going to go on the spine of the book. There are 5 of them, and we're going to be putting our fingers on top of these. I did put down a layer of Mod Podge first, and then also sealed it with a layer on top. We are ready for our final coat of silver for all of our snakes and our lock pieces, and it's super exciting to get to this point because you can finally start seeing the book come together, which is great. Perfect timing, our paint is dry and we're ready for our final layer of tissue paper. And my friends, this is where the magic happens. This is where the book starts to come to life, and it is so fun to watch this process as you're doing it. And you do need to be really careful breaking these seams. Don't drag it through like I just did. You will start to tear the paper if you do that, so be really cautious. With this final layer of paint here, it's really important that you water it down a lot. It's more of a light wash, and if you put any more than this, it's going to cover up the gorgeous texture that we got, and we're going to lose that really cracked, faded, worn look that I absolutely love. I'm also using the same paint just to give our final coat to our eyepiece, and really just play with it. Do what feels natural and good for you, and just have fun and make it your own. We are very quickly closing in on the end of this project, and one of the big final parts is gluing in our stitches. And it does look really fiddly because I'm using tweezers, but it actually is really fun and goes by really fast. The key here is to get your glue as thin as possible, and then you want to put one end into one hole and then glue it down, and then cut the other side as close to the other hole as you possibly can so that you're still getting that illusion and tricking the eye into thinking that the stitch is going all the way through the book when it's not. I love how the look turned out. I just used a piece of it's almost like a straw cord that I found in my jewelry stuff, and it worked great. You could use hemp cord. There's lots of other options that you could use. And so look around your house, see what you have, and give it a shot. Our next step is going to be attaching our fingers to our little area on the book that we created for them, and it almost looks like the finger is split open. This sounds gross, but it almost looks like the finger is split open and then attached to the book. And so I decided the best way to do this is just going to be to do the same method that we did for the seams. And I did use the paper towel because it looks kind of like fingerprint type material, and I am going to add a couple more layers, which is really going to help that aesthetic. And so this part of it was really fun. The fingers came out pretty small just because the spine of this book is pretty small. So just make it, if you want to do this part, you don't even have to do this part and it still would look great. But if you want to, just make sure it's proportionate to the spine on your book. And once this is dry, we're going to blend out that seam and get them painted and also get our stitches in. If you opt to use the hot glue method, one thing that's really important is you need to carefully pop all the bubbles of glue and push the air out so that you're not losing any texture. And our eyepiece is dry. I really wished that I could find some sort of way or mechanism to keep the eye mobile. I'd have to cut into the plastic, and I decided it wasn't worth it. But we're ready to layer our first layers of paint on our fingers. The process here is pretty much going to be the same as it was on the front of the book. We're just going to put the glue down, and we already painted it underneath, so any color that comes from underneath, it really hides the color of the clay. And I was worried about the paper towel being really thick. That kind of concerned me. But as I was removing it here, I accidentally removed one of the plies, and I realized, oh my gosh, that's like perfect. And so I decided to continue with that and actually start splitting the paper towel before putting it on. And I love how it looks. I love how it turned out and how it's just like this really thin, and it also gives it more of a fingerprint kind of look, which is cool. Sorry about the camera bumps, this is kind of challenging. But now that we're ready to start painting, one thing that's really important is I didn't want to lose any of that texture of the paper towel. And so I would lay the paint down and then immediately lift it off. And so it still gives us that kind of wash effect. And then I went in with our very same paint that we used to paint our final layer of tissue paper, and that worked great. And now we're ready to do our stitches. I had a really hard time deciding how to do this because I did not want to do a million stitches all the way around each of those. I really was like, by that point I was like, that's too many stitches for me. So after playing around with it for a little bit, I came up with this method and I ended up really loving it. I love the X's, and I tried a couple other things that didn't really look that great to me, but I ended up being really happy with this. So this is what I came up with, but maybe you might have a different method. And so let me know if you try this and you come up with a different method for this that worked out better. That would be great. Now that our spine is done, we are ready to finish out our Hocus Pocus Spellbook DIY project. And it's always exciting when you get to the point where you can finally start assembling things in a DIY project. So I'm just hot gluing these things on and placing them as carefully as I possibly can where I feel like they go. You can also see here a really good look at the lock, and you can actually use hinges to attach that. I opted not to, but it would be a really easy addition if you decided you wanted to do that. Here's a close-up look of our hot glue stitches so you can see for yourself if that is the way you want to go. Super, super easy. I think it'd be totally worth it if you had kids and wanted to do a quick version of this. Putting the eye and the lock on was my favorite part to put on, just because it's like instant personality. You get to see what it's gonna look like. And I did forget to mention, so I did put some little clay spots in front of the two corner panels because the snakes look like they're pulling and gathering the fabric to them. I just used the same method that I did for the seams and then covered it. I didn't do anything extra, but these went on super well. I was actually super impressed that they went on as great as they did, and they have been sturdy. They have held up, and it has been a joy doing this Hocus Pocus spellbook. I really hope that you give this a try and let me know how it goes in the comments. Also, let me know if you have a favorite Hocus Pocus character. I love them all, but the Queen of Night herself, Winifred Sanderson, is my favorite. If you have any other ideas for any other DIYs that you'd like to see, maybe from movies or from anything else, just let me know and I would be happy to give some other things a try. This was so fun, and I hope that you have an amazing Halloween and a safe season, and that you're doing well and you're happy and that you're celebrating life. So thank you so much for joining me, and until next time, take care.